On live national television, Jimmy Kimmel thought he could ambush the quiet, composed Barron Trump with a cheap shot about his mother, expecting the quiet teenager to crumble. But instead, Barron turned the tables in a savage, ice-cold counterattack that left the host speechless, the crowd roaring, and the entire studio exploding into chaos. It was a typical Thursday night at the famous Jimmy Kimmel Live studio in Hollywood, California. The studio lights were bright and the crowd was already buzzing when Jimmy Kimmel walked out with that big, easy grin he always wore. "Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for our guest tonight, Barron Trump." The audience clapped and cheered as Barron stepped onto the stage. Jimmy shook his hand, still smiling. "Man, you're taller than I expected. You been hitting the gym or what?" Barron gave a small nod and sat down. "Just regular stuff," he said calmly. His voice was steady, not loud, not trying to impress anyone. Jimmy jumped right into the usual small talk. "So, how's life treating you these days? Any wild stories from growing up in that crazy family?" The audience laughed. Barron answered short and polite. "It's been busy, lots of learning." He didn't ramble, didn't crack jokes back. He just sat there watching Jimmy with quiet focus. Something about how calm he was made a few people in the front row sit up a little straighter. Jimmy kept the energy going, throwing out a couple more light questions. The crowd was laughing along. The vibe felt normal, like any other night on the show. But then Jimmy's smile changed. It didn't disappear, but it tightened. He leaned forward a bit, looked Barron straight in the eyes, and his voice dropped. The playful tone was gone. "So, Barron," Jimmy said, slow and clear, "when are you planning to take that DNA test to prove who your real mother is? A lot of people out there have questions, you know." The words hit the room like a brick. For half a second, some people still chuckled, thinking it was another joke. But the laugh died fast. The studio went dead quiet. Barron didn't blink. He didn't look shocked or mad. He just sat there completely still, eyes steady on Jimmy. He took one calm breath. "I know who my mother is," Barron said, his voice even and strong. "I don't need any DNA test." The answer was simple, but it landed hard. A few people in the audience nodded slowly. Others looked surprised he answered so direct. No excuses, no long explanation. Jimmy raised his eyebrows, clearly not expecting that clean shutdown. But Barron wasn't done. He leaned forward just a little, still calm, and hit back with his own question. "Jimmy," he said, voice clear enough for every mic to catch it, "how much are they paying you to do this loyalty test tonight?" The room exploded. Gasps shot through the crowd. Someone in the back actually said, "Oh shit," loud enough to be heard. Heads turned. People looked at each other, then back at the stage. Jimmy's smile froze. A few people clapped, others looked shocked, and some just sat there with their mouths half open. Jimmy tried to laugh it off, but the laugh came out forced and thin. His usual quick smile looked stuck, like it didn't know what to do next. "Come on, Barron," Jimmy said, shifting in his chair and forcing another chuckle. "That's a little dramatic, don't you think? We're just having a conversation here." Barron didn't smile back. He stayed leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on Jimmy like he was reading every twitch on the host's face. The studio light suddenly felt hotter. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy, waiting for the next hit. Barron spoke again, his voice steady but sharper now. "This question didn't just pop up out of nowhere, Jimmy. Someone put it in your notes, so tell me, who are you really working for tonight?" Another wave of gasps rolled through the crowd. A woman in the third row actually covered her mouth. Jimmy's face tightened. He tried to play it cool, waving one hand like he was brushing away a fly. Hey, let's not turn this into some conspiracy thing. I'm just asking what a lot of people online are wondering." But Barron wasn't letting him slide. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. He held it up so the cameras could see it clearly. "This isn't a conspiracy," Barron said, unfolding the paper slowly. "This is a receipt, dated March 12th last year. A political hit site got paid $47,000 to start spreading those mother rumors. Here's the bank transfer record and the email chain. You want me to read the names out loud?" The studio went dead silent for 2 full seconds. Then exploded again. People leaned forward in their seats. Phones that had been recording the show suddenly got lifted higher. Jimmy stared at the paper like it had grown teeth. His mouth opened, but nothing came out right away. The easy confidence he'd walked on stage with was cracking fast. Barron kept going, his tone calm but unstoppable. The same site has done this to my family before. Paid stories, fake sources, same playbook. So when you ask me about DNA on national TV, it's not just a joke. It's the same old game. And I want to know who's paying for the ball tonight, Jimmy. Jimmy swallowed hard and tried to regain control. He leaned back and forced a bigger smile. All right, let's not get sidetracked. We've got plenty of other fun stuff to talk about. Tell us about your plans for the future, Barron. College? Travel? Anything exciting coming up? He tried to steer the conversation like nothing had happened, but Barron didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He just kept looking straight at Jimmy and shook his head once. No, Barron said firmly. We're not changing the subject yet. You brought my mother into this in front of millions of people. You don't get to just laugh and move on like it was a weather report. Answer the question. Who fed you that line? The tension in the room thickened. Jimmy's fingers tapped the desk once, then stopped. He glanced at the side of the stage like he was hoping someone would throw him a lifeline. But none came. The audience was split now, some nodding along with Barron, others looking uncomfortable, but everyone was glued to what would happen next. Jimmy's face had gone from tight to flushed. He wasn't laughing anymore. He reached under his desk and yanked out a thick manila folder, holding it up high like a trophy. The camera zoomed in tight. All right, Barron, he said, his voice louder now, trying to sound in charge again. You want proof? The truth about your mother is right here in this DNA file. It's all documented. He waved the folder around so the whole studio could see it, then slapped it down on the desk with a loud smack. The audience reacted instantly. Some gasped. Others leaned way forward in their seats. For a second, it looked like Jimmy had just dropped a bomb. Barron didn't flinch. He looked at the folder, then back up at Jimmy with the same steady eyes. Let me see it, he said calmly. If you're going to put my family on blast, at least show what's actually in there. Jimmy hesitated for half a beat, then slid the folder across the desk. Barron picked it up and started flipping through the pages right there on camera. The studio was so quiet you could hear the paper rustling. After a few seconds, Barron shook his head and looked straight at Jimmy. This isn't DNA evidence, he said, his voice clear and sharp. These are just printed rumors from the same trash sites. Old blog posts, anonymous tips, and zero lab results. There's nothing real here. You're waving around gossip like it's science. Murmurs spread through the crowd again. Jimmy tried to cut in, but Barron kept going, flipping to another page. Look at this. It's the same recycled story from 3 years ago. No court documents, no actual test. Just people talking shit for clicks. Then Barron reached back into his jacket and pulled out his own stack of papers. Crisp, official-looking copies with court seals on them. He held them up so every camera could catch the details. Here's the real story, Barron said, raising his voice just enough to cut through the growing noise. The two main sources pushing these mother rumors are a guy named Richard Lang and a site run by Carla Voss. Both of them got sued last year for defamation. Here are the court rulings, stamped and certified, where the judge threw out their claims for lack of evidence. They had to pay fines and retract the stories. You can read the dates and case numbers right here. He laid the court documents on the desk next to Jimmy's folder. The studio erupted. People were whispering loudly now, some pointing at the papers, others pulling out their phones to snap pictures. A couple of guys in the back actually stood up for a better view. The energy had flipped hard. What Jimmy meant as a knockout punch was turning into his own embarrassment. Jimmy stared at the court papers like they'd just bitten him. His face went pale, then red again. He grabbed for the folder, trying to pull it back, but his hands were shaking a little. Look, this is not what you think, he stammered, his voice cracking for the first time all night. We're just exploring the topic. Late-night shows ask tough questions. That's what we do. Barron didn't let him finish. He kept his eyes locked on Jimmy, calm but unrelenting. Tough questions, or paid attacks, because these documents show exactly who's been funding the lies. And now you're bringing the same garbage on your show like it's fresh news." Jimmy's usual smooth delivery was gone. His words started tumbling out faster, defensive and shaky. "Barron, come on, you're blowing this way out of proportion. The audience deserves answers. People have been asking about this for years." His voice wavered on the last part. The swagger he'd walked in with had completely disappeared. He kept glancing at the papers Barron had laid out, then back at the audience, like he was suddenly realizing the whole room had turned against his move. Jimmy was breathing harder now, his forehead shiny under the bright lights. He slammed his hand on the desk and leaned all the way forward, pointing straight at Barron. "You know what? Enough with the paperwork," he said, his voice rising. "If you're so sure, let's settle this right here, right now. Take the DNA test live on this stage, in front of everybody tonight. We'll swab your cheek on camera, send it straight to the lab, and end all the questions once and for all. What do you say, Barron? Put your money where your mouth is." The audience exploded with noise, half-shocked gasps, half-excited murmurs. Some people clapped like they were at a boxing match. Cameras swung in tight on Barron's face, waiting for the reaction. This was the moment Jimmy had been pushing for, the big, dramatic ultimatum he thought would break the kid. Barron sat completely still for a long second. He didn't look scared or angry. He just looked disappointed. Then he shook his head slowly and answered in that same calm, steady voice that had been cutting through Jimmy all night. "No," Barron said clearly. "My father advised me not to turn family matters into public entertainment. We're not doing any test. Not tonight, not on your show, not ever for a stunt like this." His words landed heavy. A few people in the crowd nodded quietly, but the tension in the room stayed sky-high. Jimmy wasn't backing down. He kept pushing, his tone getting more aggressive. "Come on, man. If you got nothing to hide, why not just do it? One quick swab and we're done. The audience deserves closure." Barron stayed quiet for another beat, then reached into his jacket again. This time he pulled out a single envelope, plain white, a little worn at the edges. He held it up so the cameras could see his name written on it in neat handwriting. "Since you keep bringing my mother into this," Barron said, his voice low but strong, "let me show you something real. This is a letter from my mom, written to me last year. Not some rumor, not some paid article. Her own words." The studio suddenly went dead silent. No coughing, no shifting in seats, just pure quiet as every eye locked on that envelope. Barron opened it carefully and pulled out the handwritten pages. He cleared his throat once and started reading aloud, his tone respectful but firm. "Dear Barron, no matter what anyone says or writes about us, you are my son. You know the truth in your heart, and that's all that matters. Our family is not entertainment for late-night shows or clickbait headlines. We don't owe the world a DNA test or a public show every time someone wants ratings. Protect your peace. Some things are private for a reason. Love you always, Mom." When Barron finished reading, the entire studio was completely still. You could hear a pin drop. A few people in the front row had tears in their eyes. Others just stared, stunned by how personal and direct the words were. The letter wasn't dramatic or angry. It was simple, honest, and it hit harder than any shouting match could. Jimmy looked rattled. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. That's touching, Barron. But we're still talking about facts here. One test could clear everything up. You're avoiding the real issue if you won't do it live." He kept pressing, his voice getting tighter, almost desperate now. "The American people want answers. You can't just hide behind a letter forever." The air in the studio felt stretched tight, like a rubber band about to snap. Barron folded the letter slowly and put it back in the envelope. He looked Jimmy dead in the eyes, calm as ever, but there was steel behind his words. "I'm not hiding," Barron said. "I'm setting a boundary. My family isn't your content. You brought this up to make a scene. I answered it. Now you're the one who can't let it go." Jimmy tried to laugh it off again, but it came out weak and shaky. The crowd was split, some whispering support for Barron, others looking uncomfortable with how far Jimmy was pushing. Then Barron did something no one saw coming. He turned his head toward the audience and spoke clearly into the microphone. "Dr. Elena Ramirez, would you please stand up?" A woman in the fifth row, dressed in a simple dark blazer, rose to her feet. The cameras swung over to her fast. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jimmy's eyes widened. He clearly had no idea she was there. Barron continued, his voice steady. Dr. Ramirez is a forensic DNA expert with 15 years at the FBI lab. She's been sitting in the audience tonight because I asked her to. Doctor, can you take a quick look at the folder Jimmy just waved around and tell everyone what you see? Dr. Ramirez walked down to the stage with quiet confidence. Jimmy looked stunned as she picked up his folder and flipped through the pages right under the bright lights. She didn't waste time. This is not DNA evidence, she said, her voice clear and professional. These are screenshots of old blog posts and anonymous tips. No lab reports, no chain of custody, no actual genetic markers. Scientifically, this folder proves nothing. A real paternity or maternity test requires proper samples, proper protocols, and accredited labs. What's in here is just noise. You don't need a public cheek swab to know who your mother is when the person making the claim has zero legitimate proof. This is theater, not science. The audience erupted. Some people clapped hard. Others shouted, "Damn!" loud enough for the mics to catch it. Jimmy's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. His big dramatic folder had just been taken apart in under 30 seconds by a real expert sitting in his own audience. Barron wasn't finished. He nodded at Dr. Ramirez, then pulled out his phone and connected it to the big screen behind them. "Thank you, Doctor. One more thing." A short audio clip started playing through the studio speakers. The voice was unmistakable. A man who had been quoted many times in those mother rumors. "Yeah, the whole thing was just a political hit job," the voice said plainly. "We were paid to keep the story alive during election season. No real evidence, just talking points. It was never about truth. It was about damaging the name." The recording ended. The studio went silent for a heartbeat, then exploded with noise. People were on their feet now. Jimmy's face turned ghost white. All the color drained out as he stared at the screen. Realizing the trap had snapped shut, Jimmy finally snapped. He slammed his hand on the desk again, voice cracking with frustration. "This is ridiculous! You're hiding behind experts and secret recordings because you're scared to take the test. You're dodging the real question, Barron. Just admit you're avoiding it." Barron let the words hang in the air for a second. Then he leaned forward, looked Jimmy straight in the eyes, and spoke with quiet force. "I'm not dodging anything," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "What I'm doing is refusing to let you turn my family into your cheap entertainment. You invited me here to talk, then ambushed me with lies and paid rumors. You waved fake evidence like it was truth. You even tried to force a DNA test on live TV for ratings. That's not journalism. That's not comedy. That's crossing a line. My dignity, my mother's name, and my family's privacy are not props for your show. Some things are off limits, Jimmy. And if you keep pushing, you're only showing the world exactly why people don't trust late-night TV anymore." The words landed like punches. The audience was split between loud applause and stunned silence. A few people whistled. Others just stared, feeling the weight of what Barron had just said. Jimmy sat there, breathing hard, his usual cocky grin completely gone. After Barron's strong words, the audience couldn't hold back anymore. Half the crowd jumped to their feet, clapping loud and hard, cheering Barron's name. "Barron! Barron!" some shouted. But the other half started booing Jimmy, yelling things like, "Too far," and "That was messed up." The noise crashed together in a chaotic wave. People were pointing at the stage, arguing with each other, phones held high, recording every second. The polite late-night audience had turned into a divided, fired-up crowd. Jimmy sat frozen behind his desk, his face pale and sweaty. He tried to wave for quiet, but it only made the boos louder. For the first time all night, the host looked completely lost. The control he'd walked in with was gone. Barron waited a few seconds, letting the chaos settle just enough so his voice would cut through. He looked straight at Jimmy, calm as ever, and asked one final question. "Jimmy, be honest with the people watching right now," Barron said, his tone steady but direct. "You went too far tonight, didn't you? Dragging my mother into this for a cheap moment, crossing that line. You know it. Say it." The studio quieted a little, everyone hanging on Jimmy's response. Jimmy shifted in his chair, swallowed hard, and muttered into the mic, Maybe I pushed it a bit too much." His voice was weak, almost embarrassed. The audience reacted with more mixed noise. Some cheers for the small admission, more boos for how late it came. Barron nodded once, then stood up slowly. He didn't smirk or celebrate. He just spoke with quiet power, his words clear for every camera and every person in the room. "The truth doesn't need someone else's fake proof," he said firmly. "I know who I am and who my mother is. That's enough. And family is not content. It's not ratings. It's not something you get to twist for laughs or clicks. Tonight you tried, and it didn't work. Next time, maybe remember there are lines you shouldn't cross." His words hit hard. The clapping started again, louder this time from the side supporting him. Even some of the people who had been booing Jimmy earlier went quiet, letting the message sink in. Barron's composure had won the night. No yelling, no meltdown, just steady strength that made everything Jimmy tried look small. Barron gave a small nod to the audience, then turned and walked off the stage with his head high and shoulders straight. He didn't rush. He didn't look back. His steps were confident, unbothered, like a young man who had faced the fire and walked through it without burning. The moment he disappeared behind the curtain, the studio felt completely different. The fun, jokey energy of a normal Jimmy Kimmel show was gone. In its place was heavy silence, mixed with low murmurs. Jimmy sat alone at his desk, staring at the empty chair where Barron had been. The cameras stayed on him, but he had nothing left to say. No quick joke, no smooth recovery. He just sat there, quiet and defeated, as the show faded to a strange, awkward close. Backstage, the crew whispered. Online, the clips were already exploding. One calm young man had walked onto the stage as a guest and left as the one who changed the whole game. Barron hadn't raised his voice once, but his quiet stand had spoken louder than anything else that night. The lights dimmed, but the impact of what just happened would stay with everyone long after the cameras stopped rolling.